Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today I'm going to be painting the Lost Woods from the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Now, as always, I've gone ahead and sketched out my plan here in my sketchbook. So what I'm going to be doing in the Lost Woods is I'm going to have Skull Kid on his stump kind of waiting for Link to show up and play the music with him. And I think I'm going to go ahead and kind of fill in a very loose drawing in chalk of kind of where things are going to go. And then I think I'm going to do a very rough underpainting of most of it. And then kind of go back in and work in the details and layers. So let's grab some chalk and draw. I'm going to start by filling in the far background and kind of doing a gradient of different yellows and greens. So I kind of have a very, very yellow-green here on my brush. And I'm going to kind of start this in the middle and work it to the left and to the right. And then I'm going to take some yellow on my brush and just lighten it up in the middle and blend it out into this light green. I'm also going to use a little bit of white to lighten this up. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did with the yellow, but add some white. The next thing I need to fill in is my ground plane. I'm just going to be using some of the same colors to kind of bring in some patches of light. I'm not super fond of the ground plane yet, but the point wasn't really to finish it. It was just to get some paint down on canvas. So my next step is going to be going into the background and starting to fill in some of the faraway trees. So I've taken this green here and mixed it in with some red violet. So if I grab my color wheel, I have kind of a yellow green here, and it's showing me that my complement is red violet. So I just added a touch of this to make it just slightly kind of dimmer. So it's not a beautiful pure color like the background is. It's kind of dull. It's kind of starting to get into a brown. So this is going to be some of these trees I fill in kind of in this area. I'm also going to be putting some faraway rocks, and they're just going to kind of look like they're shrouded in mist. They're far away, they're hard to see what's there, and they're hard to see some of the details. I've taken the rest of this color and mixed it in with more blue and more red, just to kind of make it more on the green side, and then the red is toning it down even more. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in trees this way, just kind of using that same technique, adding more blue and more red to kind of go more into this deep green, and then the red to bring it down, kind of desaturate it. So I'm just going to keep kind of filling in, I guess, some hills back here, some trees. You can see this color is definitely darker and duller than the one before. So I'm just kind of adding in different layers here. Starting to move into the darker colors here. This green is more of a phthalo green with the yellow shade, so I've mixed some of this into my previous color and then just more red, still trying to desaturate that a bit. And I'm just going to keep bringing these trees this way. Now they're also going to get a bit more detail. You can kind of see I've started to add some of that in here, and I used the color that my next layer is going to be. So they're going to get more detailed and darker the closer they get to me. I've gotten this far and I kind of feel like I need another layer behind the lightest one here, so I've remixed up a new color, and I'm just going to be very careful I don't accidentally paint over my foreground colors. I redrew the stumps and then I kind of sketched in some of the dappled light here on the forest floor. So what I'm going to do is on my palette I have a variety of yellow greens, blue greens, dark greens, a whole lot. I have like 8 different ones. And I'm just going to go ahead and start to fill in this dappled light. And I'm going to be starting with the lightest color, which is going in these ellipses here, and then kind of working my way to darker colors on the outside of the dappled light. Now, dappled light is when it's kind of filtered coming through the trees and it's kind of splotchy, which is why everything's kind of really rough. And I'm going to push that even further. I didn't want to draw in every little bit, but I'm going to push it even further as I paint it. So I was doing in the dots here to do the dappled light, thinking about each leaf making a shadow, and I don't like how it looks. So I think before I started doing the dots, I was kind of doing this streaky effect, and I like how it looks a lot better, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and redo it, but with the streaky effect instead of the dots. With the ground dry, I went and redrew all of the foreground objects, so now it's time to start filling those in. I noticed my ellipses on these tree stumps are a little bit off, so I kind of just fixed those with chalk pastel, and I'm just going to just touch those up before I move on. But moving into some of the foreground things, I'm going to remix up this color and add more red into it and then more black because it's not getting dark enough for me. I'm also going to start bringing some more browns in so these trees have more and more detail the closer they get, because out here you can see there's some detail in them, but I want them to start looking like actual trees with brown trunks and green leaves. So I'm going to start bringing in some of the brown as I come to the foreground. Moving into some of these closer rocks and ground formations, I'm going to be doing the same thing I did with the brown, but they're going to start to get more and more gray. So I took some gray and I made it the right darkness that I wanted, and then I just added some of my green into it. So it's starting to get into a gray. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill this guy in, and then add some details like this one has. I filled in this next rock, so I just need to keep adding details to it. So I still have some of the green I used originally for this, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in some of the surfaces. Still moving away from the green and trying to make colors a bit more true to life. These rocks have turned out a bit more gray, but they're still slightly green, which is perfect. So I have this next tree here, and then I have kind of this half a tree over here to fill in. And I've changed the brown I had on this tree and made it less green. Even then I mixed more burnt umber and burnt sienna into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of start working my way on these trees, still doing a lot of detail, but less green. As my trees are getting closer to the foreground, I'm giving them more and more color, more and more detail. You'll notice this one starts to have a little bit of bark going on. And this next one here that's even closer is going to have even more. So that by the time I get to this last one, this one should be like a fully barked tree with lots of detail and lots of things going on. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to add in some detail to this far away one over here. And right now I have kind of a black on my palette, and I'm just kind of shading it just to start off with. Once I have a little bit of shading on the tree, I just use more black, and this is more of a liquid black, to start to bring in some lines for the tree trunk. I went a little too overboard with the black, so I'm just taking my mid-tone and then I'm going to kind of tone this black down. And then with the highlight color, I'm just going to do the same thing as I did with the black. I went ahead and extended the shadows around all of the things that sit on the ground. Now before, it was kind of working, but especially some of the things over here where the light kind of extended a bit further under the trees, it wasn't really working, so I kind of just extended the darkness to cover those areas. Otherwise, it looks like things are floating, and that's kind of what you're seeing here with this light. It looks like it's floating above everything else. Now, I haven't touched it yet, but at some point I will, and it'll start to look like it actually sits there. In the meantime, I realized that I had done these trees up here for this closest one, and it was too blue, so I'm just taking some Jenkins green and just kind of tapping over it. Because it's a dark green, it's kind of just making it look a bit more green. Now I'm going to be adding some highlights and shadows onto these leaves, but it's still too wet, so in the meantime I'm going to jump down to this rock and start to add some value. Now, just like these rocks over here, I have a lighter version of the color and black, so I can start to add in some details to it. So I'm going to start by adding in some of these highlights, some of these planes that sit forward and get caught by the light. And then I feel like this medium gray is just too light, so I'm going to make it a bit darker, add some shadows, and then use black for like the deepest shadows. For my highlight color of the leaves, I've used some Jenkins green with a little bit of titanium white, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of tap it in like I had done the rest of the leaves. And it's here on the inside because it's brightest here, and then it's going to kind of just fade off towards the middle of the tree. And then I'm going to do the same on this tree over here. Just lightly tap in some leaves. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the shadows, except with Jenkins green plus more black. And they're just going to go on this outside part of the tree and kind of work their way in just like the highlights did. I'm just blocking these in with some solid color so I can still see them, but yet the canvas gets covered. You'll notice there's a few streaks of light canvas where I didn't have any paint before, and that's kind of hard to fix later, but thankfully I still have to do texture and stuff so I can hide it. But that's kind of the point of like priming the canvas or doing an underpainting, so I don't have to worry about any little bits of raw canvas showing through. I finished blocking off the foreground, and then I took a look at these two tree stumps, and I realized I didn't like what I had done with the ellipses of light. Now, I had planned to kind of do this big light cone here that kind of points down onto them, like it is in the game, but then I was like, my last painting I just did that, and I really like how this background is. I didn't want to cover any of that up. So I decided I would kind of just make it part of the ground plane here and just kind of turn it into a brighter spot where those tree trunks are. So while this is drying, before I can go and redraw in the base of the tree trunks here, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some detail to my two foreground trees, and I'm going to do it the same way I did these last couple, except they're just going to have more bark, more texture to them, more layers, and I'm just going to keep going between the brown, the black, and the light brown, and maybe even bring in some other colors to them. I redrew in the bases of these tree stumps, and now I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in a flat color for them like I did this one before, and then I'll move back to that one and give it some detail. You can see that after I do a base layer, I take in my shadow for my tree trunks, and then I just kind of fill in some of the bark texture. Once that dries, I'm going to go back into some of the lighter tones and some of the warmer tones and start to bring in some highlights. These tree trunks got shaded a lot differently than the rest. Now if you imagine the lights kind of coming in from here, these ones are getting lit up from the top, which is why the tops of all of the roots get lit up, and so do the tops of the tree trunks. Now that light is kind of going out this way, which is why the sides of all these ones get lit up. So that's why they've been shaded differently. Also, these ones are directly in the light, so they're going to be a lot brighter. I am going to bring a bit more shadow to them. They don't have any ground plane, they're kind of just floating there right now. But the shading on the tree trunks themselves is done. So I'm just going to start working on the ground some more around these, and then definitely this ground down here. The last bit of ground detail is just this hill here, so I've kind of sketched in a pattern that's similar to this one, except I've put it on an angle because it is on the hill, and I'm just going to go ahead and start to lighten this up and kind of work my way into the darker colors around the tree. I finished this foreground hill with the same colors I used here, except when I was doing this I made it a bit more textured because as it gets farther away you can see there's less and less texture in everything. Now I'm realizing the two stumps need to be lighter. They are in the light, and I did try and lighten them up at like the tops and on the tops of the roots, but all in all I still think they need to be lighter because the darkest is still as dark as some of these over here. So I'm going to use some more of my lighter browns and try and lighten up the entire tree stump. If I go back to my sketch for a second, you can see I originally had planned to kind of do these light spaces or these triangles down here kind of pointing onto the two tree stumps, and I had started by doing the oval or the ellipse underneath both tree stumps, and I decided I didn't like how that looked. It looked not really natural enough for me because they were perfect ellipses. So I kind of changed things up to make them look a little more natural in the forest. But the next thing I have to do, if you look at my sketch, is put Skull Kid here playing his flute. So I'm just going to go ahead and sketch him in, and then I'm going to give him a white base because some of the colors like the orange and then some of the other colors that aren't yellow won't be showing up so well because they'll be transparent over the top of this. So the white's going to kind of act as a primer in between the two. Once I'm happy with how he looks, I'm just going to go ahead and fill him in with this liquid white, and I'm going to be using the marker for most of it. The marker can't do very fine or small details, it's not quite sharp enough of a point. So once I have the majority of it done with the marker, I'm just going to switch to the same liquid that's in here and use a tiny paintbrush. I've redrawn the details on top of the white paint because they got covered up when I did that. So I can kind of see where things are, and then my next step is to kind of start to fill things in based on color, like all the red, all the green, all the black, and kind of work that way. So I'm going to be jumping around based on where things go. So the first thing I think I'm going to do is kind of his face and the bit of his arm and then the parts of his legs that are filled in black. So I'm going to use Mars Black for the base, but I think I might bring a little bit of brown in just to kind of give it a little bit of value, like on the top of his shin here. Now the reason I'm painting the black part of his body first is because I'm going to have to do the details of his face on top of that. So I think it's going to be easier if I do that first, let it dry while I work on other things, and then I can go back and do the detail. The next thing I'm going to work on is the flute, so I'm just going to fill it in with the heavy body titanium white because it's a bit more opaque than the liquid stuff I have in the marker, and then I'm just going to use a gray to kind of shade it. The next thing I'm painting is his tunic and his hat, and this is kind of a rusty orange color, and I used a red orange and I mixed in blue-green, which is its complement on the color wheel, just to tone it down because I don't want him to look like a crossing guard. I want it to be kind of a natural rusty orange color. I finished putting the rusty color down, and you'll notice there's no highlights or shadows yet. I think I need to do a second coat. It's kind of transparent and it's showing some of the stuff through and I don't like how it looks. So I'm going to let it dry and then do a second coat. In the meantime, I've mixed up kind of the green color of the grass, and it's kind of a yellow-green, and then I mixed a little bit of its complement, which is a red-violet, into it. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of mark these in. So I went ahead and kind of gave most things a first coat. I didn't have to with everything that's black, and I didn't have to with the flute. They will need more detail later, but for now I can move on to adding more of the highlights and shadows for everything that's flat. So I think I'm going to start with the shoes and just use more browns and blacks to kind of just give them some detail. You can kind of see it's lighter right here, which means that the paint didn't cover all the way, but I am going to be adding a second layer with the detail, so it won't even matter. before I add in some of the final details, I was going to talk a little bit about the shading I've done on the outfit so far. So if you think about the light kind of coming down from up here, it's going to strike the top of his hat, so that's why it's lighter here and here versus down here where it's darker. The same goes for some of the green. It's lighter along this edge, but underneath his arm it gets a bit darker. And the same here with his knee, like the top of the tunic here is lighter, and then the edges get darker, and then the grass down here, it's lighter along the bottom, kind of where the light would hit it, but tucked up underneath the tunic it gets darker. And we're done! We have Skull Kid in the Lost Woods from Ocarina of Time. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a print or a poster, or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.